Well, China has reportedly been asked to provide Russia with military assistance in the ongoing war. As a traditional ally of Russia, China could play a key role in the resolution of conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Although it could also be potentially, if their involvement gets involved in this, potentially quite bad for how this conflict goes. Let's speak to Zeno Leoni. He's a lecturer in defence studies at King's College in London with a special focus on China. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Chris.
There is a lot of speculation in the papers this morning about this request for weapons from Russia to China. Do you think China will want to get involved in this?
I think this news hasn't really been confirmed yet, and I'd like to know more about it. And I'm still puzzled for different reasons, which I would like to articulate. First of all, this news comes from a US official who couldn't speak publicly and couldn't provide further details. So I think we need to know more about that. But above all, I think, as it has been reported many times, Russia's problem on the ground in Ukraine cannot be fixed by more weapons from China or any other state. Russia's had problems of logistics, morale of the troops, the fact that troops come from a conscription system, problems of coordination. So I'm not sure exactly what China really could do for Russia or what even Russia could ask China, although it has been reported that Russia might want some drones. But again, Russian air power did pretty well in this conflict. And anyway, as it was suggested in your item, if China was to provide any lethal weapons, that would draw China directly into a direct proxy war with NATO in Ukraine. And so perhaps China might want to provide non-lethal weapons. But we really have to see how this develops.
As you rightly say, this has been quotes from an unnamed US official, although we have had the US National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, go on the record warning China that it would face harsh economic penalties if it did get involved in this. And there is a question about how President Xi feels about all of this, watching this take place, because there is an economic consequence potentially for China.
Sure. First of all, I wonder whether this news is being used by the US as an excuse to put further pressure on Beijing for all sorts of reasons and problems between the US and China, but also to finally try to get China on the side of the West, at least in this occasion. However, I think China obviously wouldn't want to face economic problems. But we always have to remember that, first of all, China has a long-term political objective here, which is to maintain some degree of support from Russia in its effort to challenge the US-led liberal order. And this is China's long-term objective. But also, we need to think to what extent the West really has the gap to sanction China. Because one thing is sanctioning Russia, and another thing is sanctioning China. And China is very interdependent, very integrated in the global economy. This would be very painful. And we have seen in the past how, for example, the Trump administration struggled to sanction China, and China actually responded to trade sanctions. So I think it's one of those things that I'll believe it when I see it, I guess.
Yeah, we had that situation certainly during the last administration where we had tit-for-tat tariffs being put on each side. And I don't think either country wants to get to that position again.
Absolutely.
But beyond that, there is that wider question, isn't there, about what it would mean if China did get involved in this conflict. Could this potentially, if China was to give support to Russia, could it potentially lead to the prospect of some kind of world war?
I think we have seen in previous scenarios, especially in the Asia-Pacific, in the Western Pacific, that China is very much risk-averse. And so I think any eventual involvement of China in this crisis might be very gradual. Certainly, China could provide economic support to Russia, although there is still a question mark as to whether China will provide military support. And eventually, I think it will be something that will be considered sub-threshold. So China will be very careful not to provide that kind of weaponry that might trigger a reaction from NATO or from other NATO-like alliances in the Asia Pacific, which could certainly open, as you alluded to, a new front in this potentially international conflict. So China will be very careful not to trigger that, I'm pretty sure, given what we have seen in the past year.
Yeah, and just briefly, Zeno, it's probably worth saying as well that China may well want some kind of stability. It's still recovering from what happened during the pandemic, still dealing with problems with COVID. And President Xi may well want a period that is a bit more settled without this kind of trouble, this kind of conflict happening with some of his allies.
Absolutely. I think there is no doubt that China is also extremely upset, in my view, about this conflict. And anything that undermines stability and economic prosperity goes against their interests. So that's a dimension, one of the Chinese dimensions. The other dimension, though, is that China has some long-term political objectives. Especially right now, China, in its grand strategy, needs to make friends, to make partnerships, because it's trying to create its own sphere of influence, especially with the developing world. And so they will do anything they can not to undermine this relationship with Russia. Although, in fairness, they've also been critical in a very subtle manner of the world. So here China has a dilemma, right? Working for economic prosperity and peace, which is also central to their worldview, or maintaining a good relationship with Russia, which will be a fundamental partner in their foreign policy in the future years.